This video is a follow-up to my previous discussion about Senator Elizabeth Warren's proposal to forgive the student loan debt of today's recent graduates. In this video, I'm going to talk about how I funded college years ago. Welcome back to my channel. My name is Dr. Anwar Youssef Dunbar. The title of this video is Elizabeth Warren's Proposal and How I Funded College. Please like the video, please share it, and please subscribe to my channel. So this video is a short, well, what I hope to be a short follow-up to the previous video, which looked at or discussed Senator Elizabeth Warren's proposal to forgive massive amounts of student loans at the cost of the taxpayers. And in that video, I talked about how we've encouraged students more towards white-collar careers versus blue-collar careers, and I talked about that higher education is a business, and that perhaps we need to figure out how to cap the costs or stop the costs from going higher and higher every year. And then lastly, I talked about how on the family level, perhaps this is something that needs to be planned out better or more extensively so that students don't have to borrow in such high amounts. In this video, I'm going to tell my story and talk about how I funded college, and then I'm going to read another short passage from this book by Georgette Miller, Esquire, entitled Living Debt-Free. So there are consequences, well, for not planning out most things, but there are consequences for not properly planning for a young person's higher education. And the higher education is a business. It's not something that schools do or give us just for the hell of it because they like us. Kind of like real estate, kind of like buying and purchasing a home. Banks don't lend the money so that we can purchase these homes because they like us, and there's a whole host of criteria that has to be met in order for us to qualify for the mortgage, and everyone in that transaction of buying and selling a home has to get paid, but that's a whole other topic. So my earliest memories of thinking about funding one's college education actually involved my older brother, who was a very important part of my life then and still is now. And I remember he's 2 years older than me, and so as the younger child, I had the advantage of watching him and what he was going through, and so I could make some other choices than what he made because I had the vantage point of seeing him go through what he went through, and I was able to see him make some of those decisions and make some mistakes, and I was able to plan accordingly and adjust accordingly. And so I think it was his senior year of high school. We went to the same high school up in Buffalo, and I remember the night my mother came home, or maybe it was his first year of college when he was actually already in a local college up in Buffalo. But I remember my mother telling him, I want you to get on the phone, go call your father, and ask him how your college education is going to be funded. So I want you to keep in mind, and you know, in telling this story, I'm not blaming my parents, and I'm not saying they did a bad. I'm sorry, I'm not saying they did a bad job, because they did a really, really good job. But there's a teachable thing here. So keep in mind that this is in my brother's, either in his senior year or it's his first semester of college. You know, how are we going to pay for this? So my brother, I remember my brother getting on the phone and giving dad a call and saying, "Hey, dad, I have a bill for my tuition here. You know, how are we going to pay for this? How can I pay for this?" So it must have been his first year of college. And dad thought about it for a second, and I think I might have been over listening, or I mean, listening in on the other line. We're still using landlines at that point. And dad thought about it. You could almost hear his wheels turning. And he said, "Son, you know, you're gonna have to take out a loan. You know, I have certain money earmarked for certain things, and you're gonna have to take out a student loan." Very stern, like that, which is how dad says things. And you know, so my brother got off the phone and he went back and he reported to my mother, "Well, Mom, you know, Dad said I'm gonna have to take out a student loan." And my mother said, "Oh my God." She said, "You shouldn't have to take out a student loan to fund your education." And so, you know, for the duration of time that my brother was pursuing his higher education, I think he took out loans. He was in state, so he got some state grants, but I think the balance of what was left in terms of the costs, he had to pay with student loans. And I think that the same thing happened to me my first year of college, because I went to college in state my first year, and then I transferred to a school. Well, I transferred to Johnson C. Smith University, which is in Charlotte, North Carolina. But the same was true for me. I don't think, you know, we didn't have college funds waiting for us when we turned 18. And so for us, it was kind of like, okay, we know we're going to college, but questions about paying for it came to the forefront when it was time to go, as opposed to it being thought out 18 years prior and having money compounding somewhere. So again, I'm not blaming my parents. It's what happened, and fortunately, I was able to come through on the other end with my bachelor's and my PhD with only a small financial burden relative to everyone else. And this is how I did it. So when I transferred to Johnson C. Smith University, which was a private school, versus the SUNY College at Brockport, which was a state school up in New York State, near Buffalo and Rochester. When I got to Johnson C. Smith University, again, I don't think the tuition piece was well planned out. And so, like a lot of other classmates who were pretty much all black and whose parents didn't really plan out how they were going to pay for college, we had to take out loans. And so, you know, back then we had to stand in the validation line, which I think was something that was only really prevalent at HBCUs. But I had to stand in the validation line, and when I finally got to the front of the line, you know, the lady there told me, "Okay, you have a balance of a couple $1,000. You know, are you prepared to pay for it?" And I kind of stared at her and said, "Well, no." And she said, "Well, you can apply for the Parent Plus loan." So mind you, I'm all the way in Charlotte, North Carolina, 12 hours away from Buffalo. And fortunately, my mother agreed to apply for the Parent Plus loan, because it's a loan that the parents have to apply for and it's a loan that the parents are partially responsible for if the child defaults. So my mother agreed to take on some risk for my college education. And so I'm also fortunate that my mother had good credit, because if my mother had bad credit, then I probably would not have continued on my education at Johnson C. Smith University, and I probably would had to have come back to Western New York. So my mother agreed to co-sign on that loan, and my mother had good credit. So I got lucky there, and I was fortunate. Not every child, not every black child is fortunate. And actually, allegedly under the Obama administration, the criteria for that Parent Plus loan got tightened, and a lot of kids and their parents didn't qualify because the parents didn't have a good credit score. So my first 2 years at Johnson C. Smith University were paid for by student loans, and I had a part-time job at McDonald's. So I was, flipping the burgers and making the Big Macs and the Quarter Pounders with cheese and preparing the McNuggets and those types of things. And that gave me a little bit of spending money for my pocket. And then, but the light bulb turned on, finally, in terms of my being a student. As a high school student, Dr. Dunbar was not a good student. I carried about an 82% average over my 4 years in high school, and I didn't qualify for any types of scholarships when I finished. But me and my father, me and Dad, did talk about that. He did tell me repeatedly, you want to excel at your coursework and not do enough just to get by. And I'm going to leave that blog post. There's a blog post I wrote called Challenging Misconceptions and Stereotypes in Academic Achievement. I'm going to leave that in the description box below in case you want to read it. So that message my father gave me about 5 years prior to college, it took a little while, but the light bulb turned on in college, and I really started burying my nose in my books, and I became a really, really good student, an A student actually. And I graduated from Johnson C. Smith with a 3.6 magna cum laude. But what happened was, one of the professors there, the late Dr. Joseph Vail Jr., he said, Anwar, as a minority, you, with your grade point average and with your work ethic, you can apply and probably qualify for a minority fellowship through the Environmental Protection Agency. And that's what we did. So I applied for this EPA fellowship for minorities through the EPA. And to make a long story short, I got it. So my final 2 years of college at Johnson C. Smith University were paid for by the federal government, and I actually earned a stipend. I had a project that I had to work on, but I earned, but this qualified me for a stipend. So my last 2 years of college were paid for, and I had spending money, so I didn't have to work at McDonald's anymore. And so that's how I paid for my undergraduate studies. So on the back end, I did owe some money from my first year of college at the SUNY College of Rockport, and then those first 2 years at Johnson C. Smith University, but the last 2 years were paid for. And so then I went to get my PhD. So then you might ask, Anwar, how did you pay for your PhD? Well, I'm glad you asked. So I unknowingly chose to major in a STEM and in one of the biomedical sciences. And I'm going to leave that blog post as to what the biomedical sciences are in the description box below. But for the sake of this video, what you need to know is that most of the sciences, most of the hard sciences, the students are usually covered, especially at your larger universities, your well-established Big Ten universities like the University of Michigan. So somehow, Students, there's enough money through the grants, through endowments, that the students are completely covered during their doctoral studies, whether it's in pharmacology, biochemistry, toxicology, cell biology, physiology, whatever. Those students are usually covered. Now, the students have to work their butts off when they get there, but they're covered. So long term, because of my work ethic and my dedication to my books in undergrad, we only had to pay for the first 2 to 3 years. Now, I didn't realize when I graduated that my mother was still paying a bill, and I helped her pay that off so she'd be free from that. And so now I've been paying down about $25,000 since I started my federal career. Actually, since I started my postdoc, I've been paying down $25,000. And it's true what they say, that the loans do last a while. They don't just go away. You know, it takes a while to pay off your student loans, and that's just $25,000. I can't imagine having to pay off $50,000 or $100,000 or $200,000. So before I end this video, I'm going to read something from, once again, from Georgette Miller Esquire's book here, Living Debt Free. And Georgette is an author and a very lovely West Indian lawyer who's passionate about money. And I listened to her talk at the Congressional Black Caucus annual legislative conference a couple of years ago, and I purchased her book. And in this passage, she talks about her own student loan story. And this goes back to, again, the importance of thinking about and planning out a young person's college education years in advance of them going. And there are ways to do that. So Georgette says, "This student loan situation is personal to me because I lived it. Although I worked full-time and didn't have to take out loans for my undergraduate schooling, I did for graduate school. When I graduated from grad school, I was burdened with student loans of approximately $95,000. So I had to get a good job, and I needed to get a high salary so I could pay back that student loan and also pay for my daily expenses. One day, I was commiserating with my law school classmates. We were all getting ready to launch ourselves into the world and start our new jobs, and we were griping about our student loan debts. One of the students piped up with, "I don't have any student loan debts." I was shocked. We were all shocked. "Wait a minute," somebody said. "We didn't know you were rich, that your family had it like that, and could write checks for you to go to college." "No," she replied. "My parents aren't wealthy." I was curious, so I pulled her aside and asked her how she did this. "Well, Georgette," she told me, "my grandmother started buying," this is where it gets good, "my grandmother started buying Coca-Cola stock for me the day I was born, and when I became 18, she handed over the stocks to me. I cashed out part of my stocks to pay for my undergraduate education at the University of Delaware. And when I got to Rutgers Law School, I cashed in the rest and paid for it all in cash. So I have no student loans." Wow, that stuck with me. Her grandmother had the foresight to start investing for her education from the day she was born so she would have no debt when she got out of graduate school. But more important, where did that put her in reality compared to me? I had $95,000 of student loan debt, and she had zero. I had to spend the first 6 to 7 years of my disposable income paying this debt back. She came out of law school and hit the ground running. What does that mean? I was 6 to 7 years behind her, even though we graduated at the same time. Many people, particularly black and brown people, do not save for their children's education. Thus, they're responsible for putting their children 6 to 7 years or more behind, assuming their children can even go to college. Fortunate are the children of parents and grandparents who have the foresight to start saving for their education early, even before they are born. So once again, in the last video, Georgette's words speak to accountability, and they speak to long-term thought, and they speak to planning out families and children and pregnancies and those kinds of things, which is the opposite of the viewpoint that, you know, babies just come and it's just nature working and we'll just deal with it when it gets here. And there are some instances where, you know, you deal with life as it comes, but there are certain aspects that you can plan out, and in some instances where it's prudent to plan them out. So that was Living Debt Free by Georgette Miller, Esquire. I'm going to stop this video here. Please let me know what you think in the comments section below. Please like the video, please share it, and please subscribe to my channel. And always remember that your attitude determines your altitude. Take care, and I'll talk to you the next time. Bye-bye.